This past weekend, man, it was really something else. Those tornadoes across the Midwest and the South, they were just devastating. But what always gets me, though? It's the stories of people coming together, the resilience and the hope that emerge even after these tragedies.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's easy to get lost in the numbers and the headlines.
Right.
But like you said, the real story is about the people, their strength, their stories.
For this deep dive, that's exactly what we're going to explore. We're going to hear from those directly impacted, try to understand what happened, what we can learn, and I guess what we can all take away from it all. We've got some really compelling articles, firsthand accounts, even historical context to put things into perspective. We're going to be focusing on Missouri, Alabama, and Mississippi. But we've got to start, I think, with this wild story out of Villa Ridge, Missouri. It's a perfect example of quick thinking, and how important it is to just speak up in an emergency, even when it's tough.
Wow. We were talking about that Burger King story, right? I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
1 minute, everything's normal. The next, you're facing a life or death situation.
I know, right? Totally. So an EF2 tornado just rips through town and bam, direct hit on this Burger King. 13 people trapped inside. Employees and customers, they all make a run for the bathroom. Gotta find safety, Can you imagine? The tornado's roaring outside, the building's literally coming apart around them.
And then to make things even more intense, the first responders, they actually thought the building was empty at first.
I know. Can you believe that?
It was the Burger King's general manager, Gabriella Breeding. She was on the phone with her employees when the tornado hit. And she was the one who was like, no way, there are people in there. You got to go back and look again.
She knew, right? Talk about being under pressure. To be able to advocate for others when, she was probably terrified herself. That's incredible.
Yeah, talk about a true leader, huh? And think about this. They finally hear voices, see a flashlight beam, and boom, all 13 people huddled in that bathroom. They were all rescued without a scratch.
It's a miracle, isn't it? Of course, we can't downplay the severity of the situation. One employee's car was totally wrecked in the parking lot. There were 5 semi-trucks flipped over nearby. It's a good reminder, the importance of having a designated shelter area, just in case.
Right. And not only having that plan in place, but also, like you were saying before, about speaking up,
Yeah.
even if the people in charge don't agree at first.
Absolutely. Okay, so we had that really, really close call in Missouri, but unfortunately, things were a lot different in Alabama. At least 7 confirmed tornadoes hit there, and the National Weather Service is still investigating. So that number, it could actually go up.
Yeah, and those tornadoes, they caused a lot of damage. And sadly, 3 people lost their lives. 2 in Plantersville from an EF3, and another person in Talladega County from an EF2.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? And the damage, homes, businesses, gone. Even the old Winterboro High School building and the gym, they were hit pretty hard. It's a stark reminder of how fragile things can be when these storms hit.
Yeah, in the blink of an eye, everything can change. And then there's Mississippi. They really bore the brunt of this outbreak. At least 6 people died, 29 injured. It's a lot to process.
I know. 21 counties reported damage, but Covington, Jefferson Davis, and Walthall counties, those were the hardest hit. And we're talking some serious tornadoes here, like EF3s, with winds over 165 miles per hour. Can you even imagine that?
It's hard to fathom the power, right? The recovery efforts down there, it's going to be a long road. It's good that organizations like MEMA, that's the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency, they're stepping in to help. They'll be crucial in providing aid and support.
Absolutely. And as we go deeper into this, it's important to remember all those numbers, the damage reports, it represents real people, real lives impacted. There's an article that really brings this home. Survivors struggle with all they lost after the deadly U.S. storm system. It's really worth a read.
A powerful reminder, right? It's easy to get caught up in statistics and kind of forget about the individual stories.
Totally. One story that really stuck with me was Christopher Maddox from Poplar Bluff, Missouri. He was just watching the news, thinking the storm would probably miss him. And then, out of nowhere, his mobile home, it was just ripped apart by a tornado. Can you even imagine that feeling? 1 minute you're safe, the next, everything's gone.
You often hear about that sense of disorientation after something like that happens. You're trying to put the pieces together, figure out what to do next. The immediate needs, like, shelter, food, clothes, it's all so overwhelming. And that's just the beginning.
It's true, isn't it? Rebuilding your life after a tornado, it's a long, long road. And it's not just about the physical stuff, it's the emotional and psychological toll as well. We're seeing this in Oklahoma too with the wildfires. Drew Bores from Stillwater, he lost his home, but he's still managing to stay positive. He's focusing on what he can control, even finding humor in the situation, which is incredible.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about people, isn't it? Even in the darkest of times, we find a way to adapt, to keep going.
It's inspiring for sure, but like you said earlier, recovery takes time and there are going to be scars. It's actually a pretty significant anniversary right now. It's been 100 years since the 1925 tri-state tornado. It's a pretty stark reminder of just how destructive these tornadoes can
Oh,
be.
wow, yeah. That one was just, it was unbelievable. The deadliest single tornado ever recorded, 695 people lost their lives, and a 219-mile path of destruction across Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana.
Murfreesboro, Illinois, that town was hit the hardest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was 234 people died there. I
Okay.
mean, it's the highest death toll for any single community
Mm-hmm.
from a tornado. And the impact on schools, especially in Murfreesboro and DeSoto, Illinois, so many children lost their lives. It's just
Just heartbreaking.
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It really makes you appreciate all the advancements we've made in weather forecasting and warning systems since then. I mean, it's still a tragedy, but it shows how far we've come.
It's true. We've learned a lot about tornadoes, but there's always more to understand. And this recent outbreak, it wasn't just tornadoes, right? It was a whole combination of things: tornadoes, wildfires, dust storms, all hitting different parts of the country.
You're right. The total death toll was 40 across all these different states. It really shows how connected everything is, how weather patterns can impact such a large area.
It's a good reminder that even if you're not directly hit by a tornado, these events can still have ripple effects. And it makes you wonder, are these events becoming more frequent? And if so, is climate change playing a role? It's a question I think a lot of us are asking right now.
Yeah, and it's a question we're going to explore more in the next part of our deep dive. But before we move on, I want to hear from you. What are your biggest takeaways so far? What's really resonated with you from all of this?
Yeah, I mean, hearing all these stories, it really hits home just how much these events impact people's lives. But now, I'm kind of curious, what about the science behind tornadoes? Like, what are they really? How do they even form?
Well, it starts with a really powerful thunderstorm.
Yeah.
When you have that warm, moist air crashing into cold, dry air, it creates a ton of instability. And often that leads to a rotating column of air. Think of it like a massive invisible blender just spinning up there in the sky.
Whoa, okay, that's a pretty intense image. And what about those wind speeds we keep hearing about? Like, how do they actually categorize tornadoes and how fast can they really get?
So for that, we use something called the Enhanced Fujita Scale, or EF scale for short. It goes from ES0, which is the weakest, with winds from 65 to 85 miles per hour, all the way up to EF5, the most intense, with winds over 200 miles per hour.
200 miles per hour? Wow, that's mind-blowing. No wonder those tornadoes cause so much damage. You mentioned Tornado Alley earlier. What exactly is that, and why do so many tornadoes seem to hit that area?
Yeah, Tornado Alley, it's kind of a nickname. It's that area in the central U.S. where tornadoes are most common.
Hmm.
Basically, it covers the Great Plains, from Texas up to South Dakota, states like Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. It's a perfect recipe for tornadoes because of the way the geography and the climate work together. You have this flat terrain that lets the warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico flow right into the cold, dry air coming down from the Rocky Mountains.
So it's all about the right ingredients coming together in the right place. So we know Tornado Alley is a hot spot, but do tornadoes happen in other parts of the world too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Tornado Alley might be the most famous, but tornadoes can form in lots of different places around the world, just not as often usually.
That makes sense. So for those of us who live in or near those tornado-prone areas, what can we do to be more prepared? Besides, having a safe shelter.
Well, I think the biggest thing is awareness. You got to pay attention to those weather forecasts and warnings. And it's important to know the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. A watch means conditions are right for a tornado to form, but a warning means one has actually been spotted, either by someone or on radar.
Right, right. A watch is like, hey, be alert, something could happen. But a warning means, okay, it's time to take action now.
Exactly. And when you get that warning, every second counts. The safest place to be is a basement. Or if you don't have one, an interior room on the lowest floor, away from any windows. And if you're in a mobile home, you got to get out and find somewhere else. Those things offer almost no protection.
It's all about having that plan, knowing exactly what to do when those sirens go off. And technology has really changed the game when it comes to tornado preparedness, hasn't it?
Oh, for sure. We have such advanced radar systems now, storm spotters, even apps on our phones that can send alerts and track storms in real time.
It's amazing how far we've come. But it still makes me think about that story from the Burger King. The general manager, she just had this gut feeling something wasn't right, even though the first responders thought the building was empty. Is there still a place for that kind of human intuition, even with all the technology we have?
Yeah, I think there is,
Yeah.
especially in emergency situations. Sometimes your instincts can be the thing that saves you. It's like that little voice inside saying, something's not right here.
It's worth listening to, that's for sure. So we've been talking a lot about tornadoes, but this storm system had a much wider impact, right? We also saw those massive dust storms in Texas and Kansas causing all sorts of chaos on the roads.
Oh yeah, those dust storms, they're nothing to mess with. They can drop visibility down to practically zero, makes driving super dangerous. Remember that huge pileup in Kansas? Like 55 vehicles involved?
Oh yeah, it sounds terrifying. Makes me want to stay put whenever the wind picks up.
Honestly, that's probably a good idea. If the visibility gets bad, the best thing to do is just pull over somewhere safe and wait it out.
Makes sense. And then there were all those wildfires in Oklahoma, fueled by those same high winds. Over 140 fires burning all at once, homes and property destroyed. It's just the scale of it all is hard to wrap your head around.
It's a good example of how these different weather events, they can all be connected.
Yeah.
High winds create the perfect conditions for both dust storms and wildfires, and the damage can be widespread.
It's like a chain reaction, one thing leading to the next. But as always, I want to bring it back to the people who lost their homes, maybe loved ones, their sense of security. Those are the stories that really matter at the end of the day.
Absolutely. We can talk about the science and how these storms work, but the real impact is on people's lives, and that's what we can't forget.
And that brings us to a really big question that a lot of people are asking right now. Are we seeing more of these extreme weather events? And if so, is it connected to climate change?
Yeah, it's a question I've been thinking about a lot too.
Hmm.
Are we seeing more and more of these crazy weather events? And is it our fault? Is it climate change? Well, it's definitely complicated. There's a lot going on. But yeah, more and more scientists are starting to think that there is a connection between climate change
Hmm.
and how often we see these intense weather events
Yeah.
and how bad they are, the intensity.
So basically, like, as the planet gets hotter, we're going to see more extreme weather, right?
Yeah.
More heavy rain, longer droughts, and maybe even like stronger
Yeah,
storms.
pretty much. It's kind of like imagine a pot of water on the stove.
Hmm.
You turn up the heat, the water boils harder, right?
Hmm.
The Earth's kind of like that. The warmer it gets, the more intense the weather can become.
Man, that's kind of scary when you put it like that. It makes you wonder, like, can we even fix it at this point? Or is it too late?
I don't think it's too late, but we got to act. We've got to get serious about dealing with climate change.
Yeah.
Reducing those greenhouse gas emissions, that means switching to cleaner energy, using less energy in general, and just being more sustainable.
So it's not just about like surviving these disasters when they happen, it's about trying to stop them from getting even worse, right?
Exactly. We need to do both.
Hmm.
Try to reduce our impact on the climate and be prepared for the changes that are already happening.
That makes sense, but I think a lot of people feel like, what can I actually do? It's such a big problem. Does anything I do even matter?
Listen, everything you do makes a difference. Every little bit helps. Think about things like using less energy at home,
Mm.
choosing products that are better for the environment, you know, voting for leaders who care about climate change. And don't underestimate the power of joining together with other people. When we all work together, we can make some serious change happen.
Right. It's all about working together. It's like that saying, think globally, act locally. Okay, so let's bring it back to this deep dive. We've been talking about tornadoes and all the damage they caused. What do you want our listeners to take away from this? What's the most important thing?
I think the biggest takeaway is just to be prepared.
Yeah.
Understand the risks where you live, make a plan, and be ready to act fast if bad weather hits. Don't wait till the last minute.
Totally agree. Be proactive. And, hearing those stories from people who've been through this, it just shows how strong people are, how much compassion and community support comes out after something like this happens.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about humans, isn't it? When things get tough, we come together to help each other. It gives you hope, even when things seem really bad.
That's a great way to put it. So, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, right? We talked about the science behind tornadoes, what they do to communities, how to be prepared, and even like the bigger picture of climate change.
It's been a pretty intense conversation, but important. I hope our listeners have a better understanding now of how powerful these storms can be and how they can stay safe.
Absolutely. And, as we always say here on the Deem Dive, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.